Look at this image from the civil rights protests of the late 1960s. The decade was a pressure cooker of assassinations, war, and societal fracture. Millions were reaching a collective emotional boiling point, experiencing identical anxieties at the exact same time. To cope with this mounting pressure, a massive counterculture emerged. They experimented heavily with psychedelics and radical new ideas, dissolving their own ego boundaries to access intense psychological depths. But they completely abandoned the traditional religious frameworks that usually manage this heavy psychological lifting. They were a generation of initiates with no priesthood to guide them. This diagram illustrates the membrane, the psychic boundary separating human consciousness from raw cosmic chaos. It acts as an energetic immune system. When millions vibrate with unanchored emotion, collective pressure violently pushes against it. The tension builds, risking a catastrophic breach. We can see that pressure perfectly visualized here at the Altamont Speedway in December 1969. Over 300,000 people packed into these hillsides. This was a massive, volatile convergence of untethered emotional energy, completely lacking any structural container. History remembers the violence at Altamont as a tragedy, marking the death of the 1960s counterculture. Viewing this strictly as a sociological failure misses the underlying physics of the event. The chaos at Altamont, an emergency, unconscious containment ritual, summoned by the collective psyche to stabilize the failing membrane before it could tear completely. Throughout human history, massive public rituals provided the infrastructure to vent this kind of psychological tension. When the youth of the 60s abandoned the old temples, pop culture naturally expanded to fill the vacuum, turning stadiums and concert fields into the new arenas of cosmic maintenance. The raised scaffolding and sheer density of bodies forced the crowd into the strict geometry of an ancient mass ritual. The stage functioned as a literal altar plane, binding the space like a psychic amphitheater. At the center of this apparatus stood Mick Jagger, unknowingly stepping into the role of the Magus, an accidental priest tasked with holding the attention of the crowd, capturing their escalating tension and directing it so the boundary could hold. His clothing that day was highly specific. The red and black garments represent the two oldest ritual polarities, red for ignition and active fire, black for the void and containment. He wore the exact colors required to stabilize a psychic discharge. The Rolling Stones' performance provided the rhythmic and symbolic architecture the ritual required, using music as a vortex to metabolize the crowd's extreme tension. Even with a focal point on stage, the sheer volume of chaotic energy threatened to overwhelm the event. When a ritual field experiences that much strain, the system spontaneously summons guardians, forces that act ruthlessly to enforce the physical and psychological boundaries of the space. The Hells Angels embodied this archetype perfectly. They were hired for security, but they quickly transformed into the human manifestation of the Guardian. They used raw, feral discipline to violently shove the encroaching chaos back from the altar. The field's density even drew in animal sentinels. At the height of the tension, German shepherds inexplicably crossed the stage. In ancient rites, dogs arrive to intuitively stabilize the perimeter when the psychic pressure peaks, sensing shifts in the membrane that humans ignore. But the final failsafe for a breaking membrane is the pivot, a tragic human sacrifice, required to absorb the ultimate breaking point of the crowd's energy, snapping the tension and forcing the breach to seal shut. The death of Meredith Hunter that day was brutal, but the violence was an emergent property of the event, a harsh structural requirement generated by the membrane to stabilize itself under maximum stress. The Altamont ritual successfully stabilized reality, but the massive energy release left behind a lingering, highly charged psychic residue. That residue bled directly into the pop culture of the 1970s. The culture found new, safe outlets through mass media and television broadcasts to metabolize the trauma of the event. Consider Melvin Belli, the celebrity lawyer who attempted to stabilize the chaos at Altamont. He subsequently appeared in Star Trek as Gorgon, an entity that manipulates reality through ritualized fear. By portraying an on-screen master of occult control just after mediating a real-world rupture, Belly's physical presence carried the ritual's symbolic signal directly into the living rooms of millions. The devilish television performances of the 1970s functioned as a symbolic reenactment of the Altamont pivot. Characters like Ben Vereen's serpentine dancer in Mary's Incredible Dream repackaged the Meredith Hunter archetype into safe, broadcasted imagery, allowing the cultural unconscious to integrate the trauma through performance. By translating the trauma into fiction, television shows and movies absorbed the excess energetic charge. They acted as secondary pressure valves, keeping society stabilized without the need for physical sacrifice. The problem today is that we have lost the ability to read these signs. We suffer from complete symbolic illiteracy. When ancient protective archetypes appear in our media, the modern public reacts with moral panic instead of comprehension. Amateur conspiracy theorists mistakenly label these necessary ritual elements, like pentagrams or a performer wearing red and black, as the work of malicious cabals. They mistake the cosmic immune system for the disease. This diagram illustrates what happens when that panic takes hold. When we sanitize our culture and attempt to interrupt these unconscious public spectacles out of fear, we systematically remove the only defense system protecting us from cosmic entropy. We have to stop fearing our own symbolic architecture. If we refuse to let these mass rituals naturally complete their cycle, we risk inadvertently tearing the very fabric of reality.